I want to tell you something before I begin. I have died before. Not in a dream, not in a metaphor. I have felt my ribs snap like dry wood. I have felt something warm and thick fill my lungs and understood with complete clarity that it was my own blood. I died on a Tuesday, and I remember every second of it. The pressure came first. That is the thing nobody tells you about being eaten alive. You expect pain, you expect screaming, but before the pain, there is pressure. A crushing, total, impossible pressure. Like the whole world is squeezing you from both sides, and your body is just a soft thing caught in the middle. The bear's jaw closed around my left side. I felt my ribs bend. Then I heard them crack. 3, maybe 4. They broke like sticks. I felt the sound more than I heard it. A deep, wet crunch that traveled up my spine and into my teeth. Then came the pain. God, the pain. It was not like anything I had felt before. It was not sharp. It was enormous. It filled every part of me at once, like someone had poured boiling water into my chest cavity and left it there. I opened my mouth to scream, but what came out was blood. Hot and metallic and thick. It coated the back of my tongue and dripped from my lips, and I could not understand why there was so much of it. I was still conscious. That was the worst part. I was completely, horrifyingly conscious. I could see the sky above me, violet and enormous and covered with a sick, pulsing light that had no right to look so beautiful. The purple moon was still rising. The trees around the clearing were doing something that trees should never do. They were moving on their own, slow and deliberate, their bark split open and threaded with glowing purple veins that pulsed like a heartbeat. The bear lifted me. I left the ground. I was dangling from its jaw, held by my rib cage, and I could feel every shift of its muscles, every adjustment of its teeth. I could feel individual pressure points where specific teeth had punctured specific places inside me. I could feel the air on my exposed side where its lower jaw, that horrible split lower jaw, forked like a snake's tongue and edged with fused bone, had torn through my shirt and my skin. The bear was not normal. Nothing was normal anymore, but this bear was something different even in a world of different things. It was covered in armor. Not armor someone had put on it, armor that had grown from it or fused to it or erupted from it during whatever the purple moon had done to the world. Plates of dense yellowed bone jutted from its shoulders, its spine, its skull. They were irregular, uneven, some smooth and some jagged, like something had tried to build a fortress out of a living creature and done it badly and painfully. The fur between the plates was matted and dark. It smelled like rot and copper and something else I had no name for, something chemical and wrong, like lightning and spoiled meat mixed together. It had one eye. The other eye socket was sealed with bone. The one eye it had was purple, glowing, the same color of the moon, the same pulsing rhythm of the veins in the trees, and it looked at me with an intelligence that an animal should not have. I hung from its jaw. I was still bleeding, and I turned my head because I am the kind of person who has to know. I have always had to know, and I looked toward the edge of the clearing where I had last seen Jonathan and Angela. They were standing there, together. They were not running. They were not looking for weapons. Jonathan was not moving toward me. He was not shouting. He was just standing at the tree line with his hands in his pockets and his face completely calm. And Angela was standing one step behind him with her arms crossed over her chest. Angela was smiling. She was smiling, but it was not the smile I expected. I had imagined, in the fractured seconds of hanging from that jaw, in the moments before shock fully took over, that if this was real, if they had planned this, the expression I would see on Angela's face would be triumph. It was not triumph. It was relief. And something else. Something I had to look at for a full 3 seconds, dangling from the jaw of an armored bear with my blood on the ground, to correctly identify. It was love. She was looking at Jonathan the way you look at someone when the last obstacle between you and them has been removed, when the thing you have wanted for a long time has finally come true. She stepped forward, one step into the clearing, just far enough that I could see her face clearly in the violet light. She said, "She never deserved you." Not to me, to Jonathan. Her voice was completely calm. "You always looked at you like you were lucky to have her, like she was doing you a favor. She never saw what you actually were." Jonathan looked at her. "I saw it," Angela said. "From the beginning. I always saw it." She was not performing. She was not crowing. She was saying something she had needed to say for a long time to the one person she had needed to say it to, and the fact that I was present and conscious and dying was simply not a relevant factor in the equation. That is the thing that broke something in me that the bear's jaw had not yet reached. Not hatred, not cruelty, just the total, complete, resolute fact of my irrelevance. She had never hated me. She had just never, for one moment, counted me as real in the way that Jonathan was real to her. I had been furniture. Expensive furniture, perhaps, that she had needed to wait patiently for the right moment to move. The bear shook me again. Angela finally looked at me directly. Our eyes met, and she said quietly, almost gently, the way you say something to a person you pity rather than hate. "I'm sorry it has to be like this." I believed her. That was the worst part. I believed that she was sorry. The bear shook me once more. My vision fractured, white at the edges, the violet sky tilted, the trees blurred into streaks of dark and glowing purple. But I kept my eyes on Jonathan. He watched me get shaken like a doll in a dog's mouth. He did not move. And then, slowly, like it was the most natural thing in the world, the corners of his mouth curved upward. He laughed. Angela laughed too. Her hand came up to cover her mouth like she was being polite about it, like laughing while watching me get eaten alive was something that required manners. The pressure increased. Something tore. I will not describe what it felt like when that happened. I cannot. Some things are too large for words. Some things live only in the body and cannot be translated into language without losing what makes them unbearable. I will only tell you this. I was still alive when they started laughing. I left my body slowly. It did not feel like floating. It felt more like stepping back from a window. One moment I was inside the pain, consumed by it, and then I was simply not. I was standing a few feet away in the clearing, and my body was on the ground, and the bear was walking away with the uninterested pace of an animal that has finished eating. I looked at myself. I will not describe that either. I looked away quickly, and I watched Jonathan instead. He came into the clearing now that the bear was gone. Angela followed him. She had taken her hair down from its ponytail, and it moved around her face in the small night wind, and she looked, I realized, with a horrible shock, relieved. She looked lighter, like she had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally been allowed to set it down. She walked to Jonathan and put her arms around him. He held her. Not the way you hold someone in crisis, not a quick, anxious hug between two survivors who have just watched something terrible happen. He held her the way you hold someone when the terrible thing is over and everything is finally the way you want it. "She's gone," Angela said into his shoulder. "Yeah," Jonathan said. Just that. Just, yeah. Like I had been a minor inconvenience that had now been resolved. Angela pulled back and looked up at him. She had been crying, I realized. At some point recently, she had been crying, and her eyes were still swollen. But the crying was over. The expression on her face now was something quieter and more complex. "I need you to promise me," she said, "that it's just us now, just us." "It's just us," Jonathan said. "It was always just us. You know that." "She had that power," Angela said. "The spatial thing. You could have stayed for the power." "I don't need her power," Jonathan said. "I never needed her power. I needed what it gave us access to. The safe house, the food stores, the supply routes. We have all of that now. We know where everything is. We don't need her." Angela nodded slowly. Then she said, "The cat." Something moved in Jonathan's expression. Something shifted and settled. "The cat is gone," he said. I went still. If a spirit can go still, if a ghost can feel the specific nausea of a particular piece of information, that is what happened to me in that moment. My cat, my Persian cat, Miso, who I had raised from a kitten, who slept on my chest, who had somehow, impossibly, seemed to grow calmer and stronger since the purple moon rose, who I had noticed made my spatial ability stronger when she was near me. "You killed her," I said. They could not hear me. "The source was the cat," Jonathan said to Angela. "I've been thinking about it for weeks. The cat amplified Julia's ability. Without the cat, Julia's power was half of what it was, maybe less. We couldn't risk Julia figuring that out and keeping the cat somewhere we couldn't reach it." "When?" Angela asked. 3 days ago," Jonathan said. "While you were on the supply run, I told Julia the cat had gotten out. She spent a whole day looking." I remembered that day. I remembered calling Miso's name through the compound. I remembered checking every room, every cabinet, every corner. I remembered the specific weight of that worry, the special panic you feel when an animal that trusts you completely has disappeared and might be outside and afraid. I had spent that whole day looking. Jonathan had spent that day watching me look. I understood something then about the nature of cruelty. I'd always thought cruelty required a certain energy, a certain passion, hatred or rage or some hot, driving emotion. But Jonathan's cruelty was cold. It was patient. It was thorough. It had started before the apocalypse, I understood that now, standing in spirit form in a violet-lit clearing while my body cooled on the ground. I understood it in the way you understand something that has been true for a long time, but that you have spent an equal amount of time refusing to see. He had been with me for the money. Hey, you're still here. If this story is resonating with you and you haven't subscribed yet, taking a second to do so really helps me keep creating stories like this. All right, let's get back to it. I had inherited a modest fortune from my grandparents at 22. Not extravagant, not the kind of wealth that changes who you are, but enough to make a certain kind of person interested in being near me. Enough to fund the early years of Jonathan's photography business, which I had believed in, which I had happily supported, which he had used to build a reputation and a contact list that he then took with him completely when the world ended. He had stayed after the purple moon for my power. My spatial ability, the strange gift that had emerged in me during the first days after the moon, the ability to sense the position of everything within roughly 40 feet of me, to understand the shape of space around me and move through it in ways that other people could not, had been useful, more than useful. In a world of mutated predators with bone armor and split jaws, the ability to know exactly where everything was before it reached you was the difference between living and dying. He had used that. He had positioned himself as my partner and used my ability's proximity effect to survive situation after situation while he looked like a hero and I looked like the quiet, unremarkable woman beside him. And Angela, I looked at her. Angela, who I had thought was my friend, who had been in my life for 4 years, who had come to my mother's birthday dinner and helped me choose paint colors for my apartment, and called me at midnight once when she was scared, and I had stayed on the phone with her for 3 hours. Angela, who loved Jonathan, who had, I now understood, always loved Jonathan, and who had watched me date him for 3 years with a specific, contained, carefully managed feeling that had never been hatred at all, only want, only the patient, aching want of someone who believed she saw something in him that I never could. I had once thought her stillness was composure. I understood now it was longing, managed daily, for years. The wind moved through the clearing. The purple veins in the trees pulsed once, slowly. The violet sky was enormous and silent above us. Jonathan put his arm around Angela's shoulder. They walked away. I watched them go. The rage I felt was not hot. It was not the sharp, immediate anger of someone who has been insulted or wronged in a small way. It was deeper than that. Colder. It settled into me like sediment settling to the bottom of a jar of water, slowly, completely, taking up all the available space. I had trusted them with my life. They had used that. They had planned it. And they had laughed. I do not know how long I stood there. Time does not work the same way when you are not in body. There is no heartbeat to measure by, no breath, no hunger. There is only the moment and the next moment and the quality of the darkness around you. Then someone spoke. It was not Jonathan. It was not Angela. It was not any voice I recognized or could locate. It came from everywhere and nowhere, the way sound comes in dreams, present and sourceless. Your resentment is too deep. I did not answer. You cannot carry it forward. It will poison everything you try to build. Go back, the voice said. It was gentle, genuinely gentle, the way a very old person sounds when they are past the point of needing anything from you. Go back and fix it. I'm dead, I said. Yes, the voice agreed. That is why this is possible. Something warm began at my throat. I looked down. Around my neck, my spirit neck, the idea of my neck, whatever it was, the pendant was glowing. A small, simple piece of jade that my grandmother had given me when I was 7, that I had worn every day since, that I had died wearing. The jade pulsed with a light that was completely different from the moon's violet. It was green and warm, and it felt, impossibly, like a hand holding mine. How far? I asked. Far enough, the voice said. Will I remember? A pause. Yes, all of it. The green light expanded. It swallowed everything. I woke up on the floor. My own floor. My apartment floor. The hardwood that I had always meant to replace and never had. The grain of it was the first thing I saw, up close, at cheek level, because I was lying face down on it in my pajamas. My chest hurt. I sat up slowly. My hands were shaking. I put them flat on the floor and breathed and waited for my vision to stabilize. I reached up and touched the pendant. Cool jade. No glow. No warmth. But it was there. I stood up and went to the window. Outside, my city was completely normal. Cars, pigeons, a man walking a dog, a woman with a stroller. The ordinary, unremarkable miracle of a world that was not ending. The sky was blue. Just blue. I found my phone on the kitchen counter where I always left it. I turned it on with hands that were still trembling and checked the date. My knees went weak. 3 months. 3 months before the purple moon. 3 months before the night in the clearing. 3 months before the bear and the cracking ribs and Jonathan's laughter and the cold weight of understanding that everything I had believed about my life was wrong. I sat on the kitchen floor because I could not remain standing. I turned on the news. A tsunami warning for the Indonesian coast, scientists puzzled by unusual seismic activity across 3 tectonic zones simultaneously, zoologists reporting strange behavioral changes in animal populations on 6 continents, aggression, unusual movement patterns, animals appearing in geographic areas they should not be able to reach. I knew what all of it meant. The world was getting ready. And I had 3 months. I did not stop to change my shoes. I did not stop to find my keys or my wallet or my phone charger. I left my apartment barefoot, in my pajamas, and I ran. My parents were booked on a flight. I knew this because I had spoken to them the week before, or the week before in the first timeline, which was also this week, which was also 3 months ago, which my brain was doing its best not to fully process, and my mother had mentioned the trip, a vacation, a week in Portugal. The flight they were taking was a flight that, in my first life, they had taken and never come back from. Not from a crash, I want to be clear about that. They survived the flight. They landed in Lisbon. They were there when the purple moon rose, and they were there when the mutations began, and they did not have enough warning to get somewhere safe. I knew this because I had not warned them. I had not had the chance. I had been too busy surviving myself to make sure they survived. Not this time. The airport was 40 minutes from my apartment in a taxi. I had no taxi, I had no shoes, and no money, and no plan except forward. So I ran. The pavement was cold and then warm and then irrelevant. I passed people who stared at me. A man outside a cafe asked if I needed help. I did not stop to answer. My feet began to hurt somewhere around the 15-minute mark, and then that too became irrelevant, absorbed into the larger urgency of moving. I got there in just over an hour. My feet were bleeding, both of them, the balls of my feet and my heels where the pavement had been roughest. I found them in the departures terminal. My father first. He is very easy to find in crowds because he is 6 feet and 7 inches tall and broad in the way that some men are broad. Not artificially, not performed, but simply naturally, structurally. Like his body was designed to take up space and protect the space around it. He was standing at the check-in counter with his carry-on bag at his feet and his glasses slightly crooked on his face, which they always were. My mother was beside him, talking to the check-in attendant with the particular focused politeness she brought to every administrative interaction. "Mom," I said. My voice came out wrong. Too much in it, too many things compressed into one syllable. She turned. Her face did the thing it does when she sees me, the involuntary softening that I have taken for granted my entire life and only understood the value of after I lost it. Then she looked at my feet. "Julia." "You can't go," I said. "Please, please don't go on this flight." My father turned around. He took in my pajamas, my bare feet, my face, the blood on the terminal floor where I was standing. He covered the distance between us in 3 steps. He picked me up. I am 31 years old. I was not expecting to be picked up, but my father is 6'7" and apparently operates by a different set of rules, because he picked me up like I was 7 again and carried me to the row of seats against the wall and sat with me in his lap while my mother crouched in front of us and held my bleeding feet in her hands. I cried. I did not plan to. I had thought I was past the crying, that the rage and the horror and the understanding of what I had come back to do had burned through all of that. I was wrong. I cried for a long time. My father held me and said nothing, which was exactly right. He rubbed slow circles on my back the way he had when I was small and the world had felt too large. My mother pressed a folded tissue against my heel and was very quiet and let me cry until I was done. When I was done, my father said, "We are not getting on that plane." Not a question. "No," I agreed. "Good," he said. "I never liked Portugal anyway. Too many hills." He paused. "Also, your mother packs 4 suitcases for a 1-week trip, which is a human rights issue I have been managing for 30 years. My mother said, without looking up from my feet. "I heard that." "I know," my father said. I laughed. It was a terrible, wet, broken laugh, but it was real. I pressed my face against my father's shoulder and I held on, and I thought about the other timeline, the one where they never came home, the one where their apartment sat empty for 6 months while the world ended and their relatives came in and took everything they could carry and left the rest to gather dust. I thought about standing in that empty apartment alone, 6 months after the purple moon, and understanding that there was no one left who knew me as a child. I held on. I need to tell you both something, and I need you to trust me, even though what I'm going to say is going to sound impossible. My parents exchanged a look over my head. My mother put her hand on my knee. "Tell us," my father said. So I told them. Not everything, not the bear, not the clearing, not Jonathan's laugh, not what I had lost or how I had died. I told them the minimum required truth, that something was coming, that I knew things I could not fully explain, that the world was going to change in ways that most people were not going to survive, and that I needed them to trust me and stay close and do some things that were going to seem extreme. When I finished, my father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need?" That is my father, reduced to his simplest and most essential form. What do you need? I started crying again, just briefly, just for a moment. "I need everything," I said, "and I need to start today." I will compress this part because the practicalities are less important than the truth underneath them, which is this. I worked harder in those 3 months than I have ever worked in my life. I bought the mountain on the third day. This is not as impossible as it sounds. I had my grandmother's inheritance, which in this timeline was intact because I had not spent 3 years quietly funding Jonathan's ambitions. I had a modest fortune, and I had knowledge no one else in the world had, which is a combination that, applied with focus and urgency, can move very quickly. The property was a mountain in a rural area with a small villa on it, and clear sightlines in every direction, and a natural spring. I paid too much for it. I did not care. The first week, I hired contractors. I told them I was a prepper. This is not unusual. Preppers are regarded with mild amusement and occasional condescension, and then contracted readily because they pay in full, up front, and do not haggle. I paid in full, up front, and did not haggle. I reinforced every wall. I installed solar panels on every south-facing surface of the roof. I strung electric fencing around the property in 3 layers, each one at a different height, because I knew from my first life that the mutated animals were various sizes and that a fence that stopped a wolf would not stop a bear. I planted the perimeter with pressure traps. Nothing lethal, because I wanted warning more than I wanted kills at the fence line. Lethal kills at the fence line meant investigating what triggered them. Warning meant I could be ready before they reached me. I built the bunker under the villa. 60 vase of food for 4 people. Medical supplies, water purification, a generator backed by the solar system, a radio, books, seeds in sealed containers for when the time came to grow things again. My parents moved in on week 2. My mother cried the first time she saw the reinforced windows. My father put his hand on the electric fence post and said, "How many volts?" "Enough," I said. "Good," he said, and went inside to make dinner. The obstacles came steadily. The government's food monitoring system flagged my bulk purchases twice. I had anticipated this. I registered as a commercial hospitality business, technically not a lie since the property had once been used as a retreat center, and spread the purchases across 6 different suppliers in 4 different states. The flags cleared within a week. A competitor in the property market sent someone to ask questions about why I had purchased the mountain. I told them I was writing a novel and needed isolation. This is also, in a specific and recursive way, true. Jonathan called on day 19. I stared at his name on my phone screen for a long moment. I did not answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was warm and easy and familiar, and I stood in the newly reinforced villa with the phone in my hand and listened to him ask if I wanted to get dinner this week. I blocked his number. It was not dramatic. It was not satisfying in the way I might have expected. It was just a necessary thing, completed. And then I went back to work. My spatial ability had changed. I noticed it on day 4, in the quiet of the early morning when everything else was still. I reached out with the sense, that awareness of the space around me, the positions and distances of everything within my range, and it was larger. In my first life, it had extended roughly 40 feet. Now it was closer to 60, maybe more. And it was clearer, more detailed. I could feel not just position, but weight distribution. Not just location, but direction of movement. I could feel, at the outer edge of the range, the difference between a bird landing and a person walking. Miso sat on my feet while I practiced. I had gotten her back on day 2, gone immediately to the shelter where she had been before Jonathan and I had adopted her together. In this timeline, arriving before we had ever been together, paying her adoption fee alone. She was smaller than I remembered, younger, her coat not yet fully grown. She sat on my feet and purred, and the range extended another 3 feet. I thought of Jonathan's voice. The cat amplified Julia's ability. I held Miso and breathed and thought, you have no idea what we're going to be capable of. It rose on a Tuesday. I know this because I counted. I had counted every day from the moment I woke up on my floor in my pajamas, and when I got to 87, I knew we had 1 day left. And when I got to 88, I gathered my parents in the main room of the villa and said, tonight. My father checked his rifle. My mother organized the medical supplies for the 3rd time. I stood at the window and watched the sky. It changed at 11:47 p.m. Not all at once, not dramatically the way you might expect the end of the world to begin. It started at the edges of the sky, where the darkness met the horizon, a faint wash of violet that you could almost convince yourself was a trick of the eyes or a pollution haze from the distant city. Then it deepened. The stars did not disappear. They changed color. They shifted from white to a pale, pulsing purple, like the sky was a membrane and something enormous was pressing against it from the other side. The dogs in the valley started first. Not barking, screaming. A dog's scream is a sound most people have never heard and will spend their lives hoping never to hear again. It is the sound an animal makes when it is experiencing something beyond the limits of what its nervous system was designed to process. All the dogs in the valley screamed at the same moment, then stopped. The silence after was worse. The birds came next. They fell out of the sky in clusters. Not dead, not initially, but disoriented, spiraling, unable to maintain direction. They hit the ground around the villa with soft, terrible impacts and lay still. Some of them did not stay still for long. I watched a blackbird stand up from where it had fallen. Its legs were wrong. The joints had reversed. It walked backward, then stopped, then walked backward again. Its eyes, when it turned toward the villa window, were purple. In the forest below the mountain, I heard the bones, the cracking, the wet, structural, organic sound of things rearranging themselves, things that were not built to be rearranged. It came from all directions, and it did not stop for a long time. And under it, layered below the cracking like a bass note under a melody, was screaming. Animals screaming. The trees began to show their veins at 12:23 a.m. It started at the root line, a faint glow seeping upward through the bark, pale at first and then brighter, the same pulsing purple as the sky. By 1 a.m., the whole forest below the mountain looked lit from within, every tree threaded with light, the pattern of the veins even visible at distance. Something large moved at the forest edge. I felt it with the spatial sense before I saw it, a weight and presence that my range described as enormous, not just large, but dense, the way stone is dense, the way metal is dense. It stepped into the clearing below the mountain and looked up at the villa. I looked back. Even at that distance, I could see the bone plates. I could see the single glowing eye. I gripped the window frame. I know you. I know exactly where you're weak. The first bear. It came up the mountain on the third night. The siren went off at 3 a.m. and I was already at the window, already dressed because I had not been sleeping. I had been sitting on the edge of my bed with my rifle across my knees, listening to the forest the way you listen when you know something is in it. I went to the watchpost. Through the scope, the bear was at the fence line, bigger than I remembered, bigger than I had let myself remember, actually, because there is a thing in the mind does with extreme threat. It softens the edges slightly, rounds down the numbers, makes the memory survivable. The reality was worse than the memory. The bone plates across its shoulders caught the floodlight and threw it back in flat, pale angles, no shine. Bone does not shine, it just sits there being dense and indifferent and very difficult to kill through. It tested the first fence with its left paw. The electricity hit it. It flinched, stepped back, shook the paw once, a fast, irritated motion, like a cat that has touched something wet. Then it looked at the fence with a single purple eye, and I could see, even at this distance, even through the scope, the cognition happening, the processing. It tested the fence again. Same spot. Then 6 inches left of that spot. It was mapping the charge variation. Left gap, I said into the radio. My voice came out steadier than I felt. It's testing for weak points in the charge. It's going to find the left gap section. Copy, my father said from the East Post. The bear found the left gap section in 4 minutes. I had underestimated it by about 3.5 minutes, which is the kind of underestimation that gets people killed. It pressed against the wide-spaced posts. The electricity hit it against the bone plates and skittered sideways, incomplete, not reaching the tissue underneath. The bear pressed harder. The posts bent. I could hear the groan of the metal even at this distance, a low structural protest. I put my eye to the scope. I steadied my breathing the way I had practiced. Exhale, pause, steady, let the crosshairs settle. The bear charged the fence. The posts buckled. The electricity hit it in the chest, the one exposed section where the bone plates gapped between the shoulder and the sternum, and the bear roared. Its head went back, throat open, exactly the angle I needed. I fired. The recoil slammed my shoulder. Not painful exactly. I had been practicing long enough that my body had learned to absorb it, but sudden and total, a sharp backward force that I had to lean into and was never quite prepared for, no matter how many times I did it. The muzzle slash was a brief white bloom at the edge of my vision. The first bullet hit. I heard it differently than I had expected, not the flat crack of impact against bone. Something wetter. A sound like something dense and fibrous being struck rather than something hard. The throat is soft even on these animals, even with all the mutation, and the sound of a bullet entering soft tissue is its own specific thing, and I will not say that I was ready for it, even though I had heard it before. The bear staggered. But it did not stop. I fired the second shot immediately, too immediately because I had not fully steadied from the first recoil, and my aim was 3 inches low and left. The bullet hit the jaw rather than the throat. I heard the crack of it against the lower jawbone, and the bear's head snapped sideways, and it made a sound I had not heard it make before, not a roar, something shorter, almost surprised. Then it oriented toward me. It looked directly at the watchpost.
the purple eye found me through the distance and the floodlight, and I felt, in a way that was entirely physical and entirely involuntary, my stomach drop. It moved toward the tower.
"It's coming to the tower," I said into the radio. My voice was less steady now. "East fence, move along to the south corner. I need you at the tower base." "Moving," my father said. The bear hit the second fence at full momentum. This fence held. I had reinforced it specifically for impact, set the posts 3 feet deep, used the heaviest gauge wire I could source. But the impact sound was enormous, a deep metallic crash that resonated up through the tower platform into my feet. The whole structure shook. I gripped the rifle. The bear backed up. It was going to charge again. I did not wait. I opened the scope and I found the throat again. The same soft center, now slightly bloodied from the first shot. The fur around it dark and matted. The bear was still moving, head low, weight shifting to its back legs in preparation. I exhaled. Let the crosshairs find the spot. Fired. This one was clean. I heard the difference immediately. The specific wet, dense sound again, but deeper this time, more internal, and the bear's forward momentum simply stopped. Not fell, stopped, like a machine that has had its power cut, all the intention draining out of it at once. It stood for a moment. The purple eye blinked. Then it went down sideways, slowly, the bone plates ringing against the rock face below the fence as each section made contact with the ground. The silence after was very large. I became aware that I was gripping the rifle so hard my knuckles had gone numb. I became aware that I had been holding my breath since the bear oriented toward the tower, and I had not noticed. I exhaled, and my hands shook slightly as the grip loosened. "Status," my father said. "Down," I said. "Stay at the base. I need a minute." I leaned my forehead against the rifle stock and breathed. 1 minute. I gave myself 1 minute. Then I went to finish it. I tracked the bear the next morning to confirm it was still down. It was. The throat shots had done what I had calculated they would do. But my shoulder hurt for 4 days. And that night, with the second fence showing the impression of the impact, I reinforced it with 2 additional layers and moved my sleeping schedule to 4-hour blocks. Clean victories teach you nothing. It is the 3-inch miss that you remember. The split-jaw tiger. It came on day 9, and it came differently. The spatial sense caught it at 212 feet, moving in from the east at a pace that was not the heavy testing movement of the bear. This was fluid and interrupted. Sprint, stop, sprint, stop. The movement of something that understood concealment and used it deliberately. I woke my father. Tiger, east, hunting pattern. We went to the east wall. It arrived at the fence line and sat. Just sat. 12 feet back from the outer fence in the long grass, only visible because the floodlight caught the glowing split of its jaw when it breathed, 4 quadrants of pale light appearing and disappearing with each inhalation, the teeth so overgrown they caught the light even closed. It did not test the fence. It watched us. I explained my plan. My father's expression made clear that he did not love my plan, but he went to the north wall and I went to make noise. I banged on the fence post with the rifle handle. I shouted. I moved deliberately, visibly, making myself the obvious and obnoxious thing in the scene. And the tiger's head swung toward me with the slow, full-attention rotation of a cat that has decided something is worth killing. It turned its back to my father. He fired. The shot hit the spine ridge, and the tiger went down. Rear legs seizing, front legs still working, the animal dragging itself forward in the particular horrible way of something that still intends to reach you, even though it cannot properly move. It screamed. The split jaw scream is doubled. I had known this from my first life and had believed I was prepared for it. I was not prepared for it. It is the sound of 2 animals screaming from one throat, the halved jaw producing 2 distinct resonant chambers, and the combined frequency hit me somewhere behind the sternum and made my vision blur briefly. I dropped from the north wall, outside the fence. I stayed outside the fence. The tiger was dragging itself toward me, and I circled left to get the throat angle, and this is where I made the mistake. I was watching the head. I should have been watching the tail. The tail had not stopped working. The mutation had altered the tiger's spine selectively, the rear leg motor function disrupted, but the tail, which uses a separate nerve cluster, was fine. The tail was very long and very heavy, and it had been sweeping the ground behind the tiger the entire time, and when I circled left, I circled into its arc. It hit me across the left shin. The impact was staggering. Not the bone-crunching force of the bear, but a fast, dense strike that dropped me immediately. I went down on my left knee in the dirt, and the rifle muzzle dipped, and I was for one fully lucid second completely vulnerable, and the tiger's front legs found new purchase in the soil, and it dragged itself another 3 feet toward me. Its front paw reached my boot. The claws caught the toe of the boot and pulled. The boot came half off. I felt the claws graze the top of my foot through the loosened boot, not deep, not the full extension of those claws against unprotected tissue, which would have been a different and much longer story. A graze, but real. A thin line of pain across the top of my foot that I felt clearly, even in the adrenaline. I was on one knee. The tiger was 4 feet from my face. The split jaw opened. I could see all 4 quadrants, the overgrown teeth, the back of the throat pink and wet, pulsing with each labored breath, the purple of its eyes, both of them still functioning, both of them absolutely fixed on me. I raised the rifle. My left hand was shaking from the impact on my shin. The muzzle moved. I pulled it steady with everything I had, and it was not perfectly steady when I fired, but it was close enough. Throat. The tiger's head dropped. The front legs stopped. I sat in the dirt outside the fence with the rifle across my knees and my boot half off and a thin line of blood across the top of my foot, and I stayed there for what felt like a long time, but was probably 40 seconds. My father appeared at the north wall. He looked at me, at the tiger, at my foot. "Inside," he said. "Give me a minute." "Julia." "1 minute," I said. He was quiet for the minute. Then I got up, pulled my boot back on, and went inside. My mother cleaned the foot and said nothing, which is her particular form of restraint when she is frightened, and I let her put a bandage on it, and then I ate the soup she had made, and did not tell either of them how close the 4 feet had felt. The next day, I built a longer perimeter around the east approach, and I started wearing shin guards. The vein tree. The tree had been moving for 4 days before I went out to face it. I want to be clear about this, because I want to be honest. I was afraid of it in a way I had not been afraid of the bear or the tiger. The bear and the tiger were things I understood. Apex predators, reconfigured. Their logic was still predator logic. They wanted to eat me or remove me as a threat. And that logic, however dangerous, is one I could work with. The tree's logic I did not understand. It had no mouth. It had no eyes that I could identify. It moved with no visible mechanism, its roots apparently retracting and extending beneath the soil in a slow, patient way. And whatever it was oriented toward seemed to have nothing to do with hunger. It wanted something else. I did not know what. On the 4th day, it reached the outer fence. I stood at the villa window and watched it extend a root under the fence line. The root was the width of my wrist, glowing at the tip with a pulsing light that left a scorched trail in the soil as it moved. It did not pause at the electric fence. It went under it. Electricity operates on contact with conducting material, and soil is not a good conductor, and the tree did not care. I went out with an axe and a rifle. The axe felt wrong in my hands. I am not someone who has used axes regularly, and the weight of it was unfamiliar and slightly embarrassing, honestly, given what I was walking toward. But a rifle requires knowing where to aim, and I did not yet know where to aim this thing, and the axe gave me the option of destructive contact while I figured it out. I approached from the north side. The tree did not react to my footsteps. It did not react to my approach. The veins pulsed their steady rhythm, in, out, approximately the cadence of a slow heartbeat, and the root tip continued its slow progress across the scorched soil inside the fence line. I reached the trunk. Up close, the bark was wrong in a way that is hard to describe. It looked like bark. It had the texture and color of bark, but underneath it, something moved, slow and rhythmic, like blood in veins, like breath in lungs, like all the things that living creatures do internally that bark is not supposed to do. I put my hand on it. It was warm. I pulled my hand back. I looked at the root entering the fence perimeter. I looked at the trunk. I thought about what I knew about these trees. Almost nothing. The vein trees were the thing I had understood least in my first life, the thing that had taken us longest to figure out how to address. And I made a decision based on incomplete information, which is sometimes all you have. I swung the axe at the nearest surface root. The tree shuddered. The shudder was full body, the entire trunk and every branch moving at once in a single, unified vibration. And the sound it made was below hearing. I felt it in my teeth and my chest and the spaces between my ribs before my ears registered anything. Miso, who I had left inside, could not have been feeling this, and yet I thought of her in that moment. The other roots retracted, all of them, simultaneously, snapping back from wherever they had reached, pulling under the soil, the scorched trail lines in the dirt contracting like strings being pulled from above. The bark split, vertically, a long, slow crack running from the base of the trunk to about chest height, and through the crack, the light was intense. Not the gentle pulse of the veins, but a concentrated brightness, the blue-white edge of it bleeding into purple at the center, the way a very hot flame is white at its heart. I understood what I was looking at. The core. I raised the rifle. My hands were not shaking, but they wanted to. I could feel the wanting underneath the steadiness, the physiological reality of my body processing the fear it was not being allowed to express in any other way. My breathing was too fast. I made myself slow it. The light from the core was bright enough that I had to sight with one eye partially closed. I found the center of it, the warmest point, the place where the pulse originated. I could see it now. The faint in-out rhythm of the light matching the rhythm I had felt in the bark, and the center of the pulse was a knot of tissue roughly the size of a fist, dark purple, almost to black at its very center, surrounded by the radiating glow of everything it was powering. I held the sight there, breathed out. In the half-second before I fired, the tree moved. Not toward me, inward. The crack in the bark began to close, slowly, the way a wound closes in accelerated footage, the edges of the split bark beginning to creep back toward each other. And I understood that if I waited another 10 seconds, the core would be sealed, and I would have nothing to aim at, and would have to start this entire process over. I fired. The sound in the enclosed space of the tree's immediate vicinity was enormous. The muzzle flash lit the exposed core for a fraction of a second in sharp white. The core went dark. Not gradually, instantly. The light simply stopped, the way a screen goes dark when the power fails, and in the sudden absence of it, the forest around me was darker than it had been, the ambient purple of the veins slightly dimmer, like the tree had been contributing to the overall light budget of the forest and had now withdrawn its share. The trunk collapsed. Inward. Perfectly inward, every branch dropping simultaneously, the whole structure falling into its own footprint, without toppling, without breaking against the ground the way a felled tree breaks. It simply ceased to be upright and became a low pile of itself, the bark already beginning to gray at the edges, the veins going dark in sequence from the core outward, like lights being switched off in a building at closing time. I stood in front of it for a moment. The forest was quieter than it had been. I realized my left hand, the one that had touched the bark, was still warm. Not burnt, not damaged, just warm, the way a hand is warm after holding a mug of tea. I did not know what that meant. I still do not know what that meant. I went inside and wrote everything down. Now, let's talk about my dear Jonathan and his team. They appeared on day 41. I felt them at the edge of my spatial sense before I saw them. Two human weight presences moving up the southern approach, slow, stopping often. The pattern of people who are exhausted and not entirely sure they want to be seen. I watched them from the east tower with binoculars. Jonathan was thin in a way that did not suit him. He had always been vain about his appearance in a quiet, consistent way. The careful haircuts, the fitted shirts, the specific way he stood that added half an inch to his height. All of that was gone. His clothes were stiff with old dirt, and he was limping on his left side, and his face had the particular hollow quality of someone who had not eaten enough protein in weeks. Angela was behind him. She was also thin. She was also dirty. She walked with her arms crossed over her chest and her eyes moving from side to side, and even at distance, through binoculars, I could see that she was frightened. They reached the outer fence. The electricity hit Jonathan's outstretched hand. He shouted and stumbled back. He looked at the fence for a long moment. Then he looked at the villa. His eyes went to the solar panels, the reinforced walls, the watchtower where I was standing. He could not see me clearly. The tower had a reflective panel on its south face. He shouted my name. I did not answer. He shouted it again. Then he said, "Julia, I know you're in there. I know this is yours. Please, we need help. We're starving. Please let us in." I stood in the tower and I thought about the clearing. The violet sky, the bear's jaw, the sound of my ribs. I thought about Jonathan's laugh. I did not let them in. They stayed at the fence line for 2 hours. Jonathan talked for most of it. He apologized, he explained. He said that everything had gone wrong, that the other survivors they had been with had died, that they had been alone for 3 weeks. His voice cycled through pleading and anger and exhaustion, and back to pleading. Angela said almost nothing. At one point, she looked directly at the tower, looked at the exact spot where I was standing, though she could not have known it, and her expression was not pleading. It was not apologetic. It was a careful, controlled blankness that I recognize now for what it was. The face of a woman who had spent years managing her own wanting and who had run out of ways to manage it and who was standing on the wrong side of a fence she knew she deserved to be on. The tiger came at dusk. A different tiger than the one we had killed, this one larger, the spine ridge more pronounced, the jaw split in a slightly different configuration. My spatial sense caught it at the tree line at 5:40 p.m., and I tracked it without moving from the tower. It moved toward the fence. Then it corrected. It had smelled Jonathan and Angela first. Jonathan saw it too late. He was turning to leave when the tiger emerged from the long grass and covered the 40 feet between them in less time than it takes to describe it. Jonathan ran. He was not fast enough. He was not, in this moment, lucky enough. The tiger caught him at the edge of the tree line. Angela ran. I watched. Not because I wanted to, not because the watching pleased me or satisfied anything in me. I watched because I had decided that I would not intervene, and having decided that, I needed to see it clearly and not look away. I needed to not comfort myself with distance or blurred vision. Jonathan made sounds I will not describe. Then he did not make sounds anymore. The tiger moved away into the forest, unhurried, full. I stood in the tower. The sky was violet and quiet. I waited to feel something, some version of satisfaction or grief or relief. some emotion large enough to match the event. I felt nothing. Not numbness exactly, more like completion, like a calculation that has been open for a long time has finally reached its last step. The answer was not satisfying, it was simply the answer. I went inside. My mother had made dinner. I sat down at the table, and my father put a bowl of soup in front of me, and I picked up the spoon and ate. On day 60, I started writing. I told my parents I was working on a novel. This was true. I sat at the desk in the small room I had set up as a study, and I wrote, in the form of a science fiction thriller, everything I knew. The anatomy of the bone-armored bears and where the bone plates were thinnest, the exact mechanics of the split-jaw tiger's spines, and why a shot to the spine ridge temporarily severed motor function in the rear limbs, the heart core of the vein trees, and why cutting roots exposed it, the frequency of the screamer deer's calls, and the fact that the deer's own ears were sensitive to that same frequency, which meant that a sound reflected back at the right pitch would cause them to flee. The neck joint of the spider corpses, where the host body's original spinal tissue had fused with the post-mutation growth and remained incompletely armored. I wrote it as fiction. I made the main character a different woman with a different name. I changed the geography. I embedded the information inside a story that was dramatic and readable and designed to reach people. The book was finished on day 90. I published it online as a serial, free to read, under a pen name. Gamers found it first. Within 6 weeks, there were 3 separate survival game mods built on the creature mechanics I had described. The players argued in forums about which weak points were most efficient, they ran simulations, they optimized, they shared strategies with strangers across time zones, debating the best approach angles for bears, the precise timing for the tiger flank maneuver, the exact cutting depth that triggered root retraction in vein trees. They were training. They did not know they were training. The mods spread. The information inside them spread with it, disguised as entertainment, passed from player to player like something useful that felt like fun. On day 112, a government official contacted me. Not aggressively, carefully, with the particular careful politeness of someone who does not know exactly what they are dealing with and wants to maintain good relations in case the answer turns out to be important. They had noticed the survival patterns. In the regions where my book had the most readers, survival rates were measurably higher. People were using the weak points. People were building the right kinds of barriers. People were making the right choices when faced with specific threat types. They wanted to know how I knew. I told them I had done research. This is true, in a way. I cooperated with them. Carefully and fully, because the goal was never revenge on a dead man, never proving something to myself, never anything small. The goal was always this, that more people survive, that the world come back, that whatever the purple moon had been, cosmic accident, biological event, something vaster and stranger that I would never fully understand, it would not be the end of everything. I worked with them for 2 years. In my first life, it had taken 8 years for the major beast populations to be controlled enough for large-scale rebuilding to begin. In this one, it took 4. 5 years later. My parents' garden is impossible. That is the first thing I think when I look at it on the morning of the 5th anniversary. My mother has grown tomatoes in soil that was contaminated by purple vein growth 18 months ago, and she has grown them enormous and red, and she is extremely smug about this, and she deserves to be. My father built a greenhouse. He did not ask for help. He sourced the materials, drew the plans in a notebook, and built it over 3 weeks while listening to cricket matches on a solar-powered radio. When it was finished, he invited my mother to see it, and she cried, and he said, "It's just a greenhouse, Miriam." And she said, "I know what it is." And they stood in it together for a long time. I was given an award by the Governmental Reconstruction Authority. I wore a dress I had bought in a market that had reopened in the city 6 months ago. Markets are signs. They mean there are things to sell and people to sell them to, and a belief that tomorrow will exist and that people will want things in it. Markets are hope made concrete. I accepted the award. I said something brief, and I meant it. Miso is 4 years old now, which is young for a Persian, and she has grown into the kind of cat that runs a room simply by entering it. She is enormous and imperious, and she sits on my shoulders when I practice the spatial ability, which has expanded to 200 feet now and includes the ability to feel not just position, but emotional register. The difference between an animal at rest and an animal preparing to attack. The difference between a person who is afraid and a person who is calm. I do not know why the ability has grown. I suspect Miso knows. She has that look sometimes. The big beasts are gone. Not all mutations, not all changes. The world is not what it was before the purple moon, and I have stopped expecting it to return there. But the apex predators, the bone-armored bears, the split-jawed tigers, the vein trees, they have been handled. Between the information I provided and the government programs and the ordinary courage of ordinary people who read a fiction novel and learned from it, the largest threats have been identified and addressed. The world is rebuilding. It is slower than before and stranger than before, and in some ways, I think, more honest than before. Because everyone who is here chose to be here, in the sense that they fought for it, or they had someone who fought for them, or they made some decision in a hard moment that brought them through. I chose to be here. Twice. On the 5th anniversary, I stand at the window of the villa at night. The sky is clear. The stars are white again, normal white. Cool and steady and ancient, performing none of the violent pulsing that I watched 5 years ago and that I see sometimes still in my sleep. Then I look at the moon. Just the regular moon. The white moon, not the purple one, and it is 3/4 full tonight and peaceful. I am about to turn away, and the moon shifts. Not flickers, not blinks, not any of the things a disruption in a light source does. It shifts. Like a painting that has been hanging at a very slight angle your entire life that you have looked at every day without noticing, and then someone adjusts it by 2 degrees, and suddenly the wrongness you could never name is the only thing visible. The moon's position in the sky is identical to where it was before. Its light is identical, but something in the quality of it has changed. Not the color, not the brightness, something underneath both of those things. Something in the character of the light itself, the way a person's voice sounds identical in volume and pitch, but communicates something completely different depending on what is in them when they speak. The moon is looking at me. That is the only way I can describe it, and I understand how that sounds. The moon is not a face. It has no eyes. It is a body of rock and dust approximately 238,000 miles from where I am standing. I know this. None of that changes what I feel when the shift happens, which is the specific and unmistakable sensation of being perceived, of being the object of attention rather than the subject of it. Something up there has noticed that I am here. Something up there has always known I was here. Miso, on my shoulder, does not move. Her claws press once, lightly, into my skin. Not alarm, not comfort, just presence. The physical language of I am here and I feel it too. And then she is still. The spatial sense reaches out automatically. 200 feet of information. The garden, the greenhouse, my parents sleeping, the mountain, the forest, the beginning of the long, quiet country beyond. All of it normal. All of it present and correctly placed. But the sense does not stop at 200 feet tonight. It keeps going. Past its normal limit, like a hand reaching further than it should be able to, past the forest and the valley and the distant city lights, past the curvature of the world itself, stretching outward into something cold and enormous and patient. And it finds an edge. Not the edge of my ability, not the limit of my range, the edge of something else. Something standing just outside the frame of everything I can perceive, not approaching, not receding, just there. The way a word is there on the tip of your tongue, the way a shape is there in the dark when you cannot find the light switch. Present, but not yet visible. Known, but not yet named. The moon's light falls through the window onto my hands. I look down at them. My hands that have held a rifle and an axe, and my mother's hand and my father's arm, and the small warm weight of my cat. My hands that have done what was necessary. My hands that have moved through this second life with the knowledge of the first one buried in them like something structural. I look back up. The moon is just the moon, but the edge is still there, just past the limit of the sense, steady and enormous, and completely aware of me. The pendant at my throat is cool. Just cool. Then, 1 degree warmer. Just 1 degree, just for a second, just long enough to be certain it is not my imagination. I know, I say, to whatever is there, to whatever sent me back and has been watching since. I know you're there. The night is quiet. The mountain holds still. And from just beyond the edge of everything I can perceive, something that is very large and very patient and has been watching since before the purple moon ever rose, does not answer, but does not look away. The end.